Hello, everyone. I am so pleased to introduce to you a film that's in the U.S. Dramatic Competition at Sundance this year. It's called Blood. It's made by a married couple that have worked together for many, many years and made many films together. And let's start by showing a clip from the film Blood.
トシさん、はい。Can I ask you a favor? Can you come and translate for me?
Hi. Ah. Wasabi.
Mm-hmm.
Careful.
Mm-hmm. Ah, strong. これ。
Oh. ああ、すごい。
これご飯で食べる。
吸った途端全然違いますね。ああ、Are you crying? 感動して泣いてます。
泣く。わお。
いただきます。
はい、どうぞ。はい、ここにあるよ。
I can feel it in my eyes.
はい、始めましょう。はい、笑顔で。
おいしいです。You should say.
最初。
美味しいけど、すごい。
涙が出るでしょ。
鼻詰まりが治り
そう
ます。
そう。
これは。
風邪、花粉症、OK。なんか死にそうな顔しないで。
なんか今魂が抜けるような。
知らないや。
いや、マイスピリット。
なんか。何度言って。で、あと海苔をね、もう少し。
That scene is that it's not just the white foreigner that is reacting strongly to the very hot wasabi, but the Japanese person too. So anyway, I'm so pleased to introduce to you the director and producer of the film, Brad Gray, and the producer of the film, So Yong Kim.
Nice to meet you. Hello.
Hi, nice to see you. Nice to see you. What I've learned in the last couple of days is that you two are not only bridges between East and West, but you've really traveled the world over. Just tell us a little bit about your sensibility and how it affects your filmmaking, where you've been, and how it all sort of converged onto this and many other films.
Wow.
So it's a big question.
Yeah.
It must have been something that drew you together. I know you met in Chicago, but
we met in Chicago. We were at art school. Actually, I had graduated. She was still a student.
Yeah, I was finishing up my undergrad in painting, and then I think you did a performance like sculpture project in the courtyard.
Yeah. You didn't like that.
I didn't
but
like
then
that.
we did. She did a lot of performance. We were both invited to a group of artists that were doing a sort of installation performance for a week in an abandoned building in Chicago. And so the project was called Walk, and we were both a part of that. So we met doing that. And then I was interested in film, and So had taken a film. The film courses in Chicago are very experimental. Like if you have sync sound, it's like you sold out or something. It's very experimental. And
not exactly USC.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
So we had met doing artwork and sort of installations and different things like that. And then I studied film in London, and so did an exchange program in London, doing sculpture at the Slade. And then when did we start? Yeah, and then I went to film school, and then after that, and so made sort of experimental films. In the meantime, more. She was living in New York, and I lived in LA. Well, I went to USC, and then we decided to do this first film together, my film in Iceland, but the year before we left for Iceland, So got a job in Tokyo. So we lived in Tokyo for a year, and then we went to Iceland and shot our first film. And then she's like, well, if you can make a film, I can make a film. So then she made 2 in a row, and then I've been trying to catch up with her since then.
Like that good old competitive spirit. And
yeah, I'm like, oh, it looked so easy, you know. He made it look so easy, actually. I think it's all his fault.
I see. It's all your fault. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's really true.
She's never going to forgive you for that.
Yeah, exactly. She's thinking off. I don't think we started with thinking that we were going to just make films though for a long time. But once you start making them, it's such a long process, and it gives such a structure, because when you're doing like just artwork openly, you can do anything. And so a film has so many sort of restraints that I think ended up working in our favor as something that would be a goal, and that takes a long time to sort of achieve. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there's an emotional connection with film that you don't really get all the time with artwork.
Yeah, especially if you're doing like just sculpture or paintings or something. It's very different than.
And it's collaborative.
Yeah.
And
filmmaking is much more collaborative.
Yeah, in a good way.
In a good way.
Anyway, sorry, that was a long answer.
Oh, that was a really good answer, because I can see how you just sort of tumbled forth, and hope, you know, it seems like you could understand enough of each other's sensibilities that you could be supportive, maybe offer up a different opinion at times. So this particular film, Blood, was a co-production between Iceland and Japan. There aren't many of those. Tell me about how that came to be.
Well, we had lived in Japan. Well, we lived in both places. And so I wanted to make a film in Tokyo. And there's a choreographer there who we became friends with when we lived there. And her and I had always talked about working on something together. We were like, just had a box, like a hypothetical box, just put our ideas in a box, and someday we'll open a box and sort of compare notes. So when I started working on this, I thought, I could do this in Japan with Chiyoko. And then, I got in touch with her, and she was on board with that idea. And that's how the sort of Japanese component of the film took hold. And then in the film, you see dreams of this character's husband. And Iceland became a really viable option, because at that time, we shot the Japanese part in 2019 in the fall, like right before the pandemic hit. And then in the Icelandic portion was last spring. So Iceland was one of the few places we could shoot without wearing masks, because it was so safe there. It's so secluded, and they test, and they're really, really cautious. And we have so many friends there that I wanted to find a place where it just felt like they naturally had friends. And it's easier to do that if you already know the people you'll be shooting with. Mm-hmm. So that's why that came to be.
And what was your role primarily, So Young, on this? Do you get very involved during the script stage, pre-production, post-production?
Yeah, normally I would like to get involved during production as well, but for Blood, I think it was more in the development and story development in the beginning, just be a sounding board. And then during the edit, I wasn't able to do the physical editing, but he would show me cuts and would do notes and go back and forth and stuff. So yeah.
She's always around, so there's always.
I'm always around. That's
like, stop talking about.
Just stop talking.
Yeah, it's like, when is she not working on?
I know.
Yeah. There's another producer who was on this one now, David Arusha, who's like, I was on the phone every day with him for like probably the last 6 years, and so he was this sort of really like
instrumental
holding my hand producer. Yeah, because So was shooting TV a lot during the time we were doing this one, which was good.
So you just make it up as you go along in terms of what's needed and who else is involved, and it sounds, and you provide the support that you need. And this movie was just literally transporting one to Japan, and it felt really intimate. It's very easy to kind of exoticize a location, I think, especially when you're talking about one that is very different culturally. And I felt like this one was so intimate that you had a lot of close-ups and a lot of really nuanced conversations. You really take your time. You saw that in the clip. And this, I think, is part of your style. But what were some of the challenges maybe about shooting, this film in Japan? Was the environment very hospitable for you?
Oh, it was wonderful. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, because we're trying not to exoticize, Japan. We didn't want a scene where she goes to a temple or has a, tea ceremony or something. And a lot of that episode give thanks to our friend Tak, who he's just a really good friend of ours, and he would tell me, like, don't do that or don't do this, and he introduced me actually to Ueno, who's the actor. He sent me a YouTube video of him. Ueno's a musician, and then when I met Ueno, he introduced me to all his friends. And because the film's about her visiting him and she will meet his friends, we're like, can we use your friends in the movie? And then he introduced us to a guy that owned about like 10 restaurants in Koenji. And they were like, you should shoot in Koenji. So we were really well, sort of guided about the process. So's old boss introduced me to Sami-san, the guy who does the wasabi rice, because I said I wanted to meet interesting people, and he's like, oh, I know somebody you should meet. So it was like a really warm and wonderful way of shooting, because it's like you go somewhere, you have an excuse to meet friends of friends, and then that just like one led to the other, and kind of followed. So we kind of put Chloe in that situation too, and then she just kind of follows whatever he's doing, and that was a really warm and wonderful. Yeah, it was really nice, easy.
So perhaps you were writing the script as you were shooting, because it sounds like you didn't necessarily have all actors, you didn't necessarily have all the locations locked in. You were creating the environments through friends and through a community. It feels that way. It feels like it was made amongst friends.
For sure.
Yeah.
It was a combination. Like Ueno, when I said, here, okay, we're going to shoot these 4 weeks. He's like, okay. And he gets out his calendar. He knew that we were going to shoot these 4 weeks, but he's like, okay, I'm recording a concert this weekend. And then here I've got band practice, and here I'm doing and we're like, you can't, like, I need you to be acting in the movie, like I can't, there's like a lot of people we're paying, and we can't just like stop, and then, you stop and sit back and think about it. And I was like, well, can we record those things? Can we make that part of the movie? And he's like, yeah, sure. Let me ask and make sure it's okay with everybody else. So a lot of the events in the film happened because Ueno was doing something, and then we would just kind of go with him. He recorded an album in the countryside with his friends, and it's just a wonderful location. And it says something about their relationship, because if you invite a friend who's a girl with you to go somewhere for the weekend, and it's just to hang out, and then, but it's still intimate, but it's like, it's not too intimate, but it says something about the way they trust each other, that they can sort of spend time together. And so it was actually better scene than what I would have thought of.
But what's really amazing about Brad and the way he works is that, like, I'm so envious when I watch him work. And I had 1 week where I went to Tokyo to be there for the shoot, and it's so wonderful because he allows that space and time to really like switch out of the plan if something's not working with Ueno-san or Carla. He's like so flexible, and I think that's like him doing his creative best at that moment, and it's just really great to watch. I love watching him work because it's so fantastic, because you have to keep your mind agile and flexible and be really in that moment to be able to always go with the flow of it all, especially under that amount of pressure and stress. So I think it's just wonderful process that he creates for himself.
Absolutely. Well, you have a very supportive producer and wife. That's beautiful.
No, he has many, but also he has like many there's many supportive producers. One element, there are 2-3 other producers that are, very good as well. So.
But no, it's nice to have producers. Sometimes producers don't get credit, but the allowing, because that's not often how people approach their work, just allowing it to unfold. And you feel the very naturalistic style of the film.
Exactly.
It never felt disturbed or forced or,
No, thank you. It's definitely the team. I mean, everybody knew this is the type of film we wanted to make, and they were really supportive. If it was like, hey, let's stop and walk down the street and shoot, because the light is nice, and everyone's like, okay, and how can we help? And it just, you just get everybody in sync, and it just became a really wonderful experience. Yeah.
Did you know the actress beforehand, Carla Drury?
Carla, no. Well, she was recommended by Jenny Ju, casting director that we were using at the time here in LA. and she was in town, and we met, and she was like, I don't really like your script. But she's like, my manager did. And then we went for a walk, and we talked about, you know, where the story came from for me. And then she's like, okay, I get it. And then she was on board, and she was probably on for about 2 years before we filmed. And the idea of working, because we were at first talking to Japanese actors. There's so many wonderful Japanese actors. So that was, there was a casting director, Kei Kimura, who had helped us find actors in Japan. And then this idea came up of working with a non-actor, which is something that I really like to do. And I talked to Carla about it, and we met at Ueno, and it was just like, oh, this is just a gift. So, yeah.
Talk a little bit about the daughter character.
Oh, she's great. So Futaba, there's a scene in the film where Chiyoko, the choreographer, works with a group of Down syndrome children. And Chiyoko's just really, she's just like a son, you know, and like seeing her interact with other people is just so exciting. So I wanted to do this scene. I'd seen her work with elementary school children. And so we came up with another idea of like, she was working with Down syndrome children and teenagers in a park. And so I contacted the society in Tokyo, and the guy that was helping navigate that had a daughter that was about the right age for the character that I wanted in the film. And we couldn't find anybody. And I was like, can I meet your daughter? And he was like, yeah. And then she was just like super cool from the, you know, she's like, what's up? And then she walks off. And then she was just herself constantly. And it's like what you want from, I wanted to not know what was going to happen if she was in a scene. And she definitely was going to be able to provide that. And she met Ueno, and they just super bonded immediately. And it was just such a gift. I called her like the little butterfly, because she's just, she does whatever she wants, and she just brought so much life to the film. Yeah.
Well, I know people who have children with Down syndrome, and they say they're just the most loving, unfiltered beings. They're so loving, so incredibly loving. And
yeah, she's so giving. Yeah.
So Young, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you have coming up? That Brad is going to support you to the end of time?
Oh, yeah. That's right.
She's got a list.
I know. I have a list. But I think, well, because I've been working so much in TV, right now my time is so constrained. So there's a script that I've been developing for a long time and writing. And then I'm going through this rewrite phase, and I'm kind of drawing Brad in to help me rewrite the script with me and for me. So he has to work for me, which works much better. So that's he's a great writer as well. So,
and so that's frequently how you work, that Brad might write something, you have the idea, you might do a draft, and then he might come in and.
Yeah, I think that really worked well for Love Song, which was my last film. And I was teaching at that time, so I was lacking some time, because for me, especially, like, writing is such an arduous and long process. So if I could bring in somebody to help me kind of shorten that timeline, it's really helpful. And that's how it worked for Love Song. And I think for us, like, writing together works, and then editing together works, like, creatively. I mean, I don't think we could ever co-direct something together, because that's
we couldn't co-direct, but on set we're really supportive. Like, she's really supportive.
Yeah, on set we are.
Kicks me off for a set, but
he's there talking a lot, so I had to kick him off, and then when we write something together, and then when we're editing together, we work really well together. So
well, writing is very, very lonely when you do it on your own, and so is editing. You're stuck in a room, right?
So when a lot of those stories are really personal, and they're about like her family or our family, and so it's easy to step into her world, because I know the characters immediately, because I know who she's writing about. You know, she's writing about people like us, or you know,
or people you've known,
people I've known, or stories I've heard, and everything like this. So
that was perhaps not always the case. So Young, what is your where were you born and raised? And then
I was born in Korea, and then our family immigrated when I was 11. and then but I think it worked out really well, like for Love Song, because like he knew, like as I was developing and writing that script, like the backstory, and then I would bounce ideas off of him. So he knew where the characters were, that I needed him to like take a chunk and expand on it. And same thing with this new script called Stray Dogs. Like he knows like the genesis of it and what the evolution of that story is, so he could kind of pop in and expand certain parts, and also, you know, do his pass on it, and I could get it back and edit it down. So that seemed to work really well. I think that is kind of similar in process for us in editing as well. So I feel like we're very clear about what our strengths and weaknesses are in editing. So I'm able to do a certain aspect of the storyline and then give it back to him, and he could go in there and he does his pass. I think that's why it works really well.
That's a wonderful collaboration. Is there anything else? Yeah. Oh, it's. I love, you know, over time, couples get to know each other better and better. And I've seen other couples who work very, very closely together, and sometimes it doesn't always work out that well. You know, there does have to be a clear division of labor. Sounds like the two of you have had a lot of experience and figured out how best to make it work. I think it's very enviable for a lot of people, because to have a partner at all times, you know, that you can.
Yeah. I don't know. And I think, like, you know, we have friends who direct together, like Ryan and Anna.
Yeah.
Like certain directing partners. And I don't know how they do it. Yeah. Or the Daniels. I don't know how they do it, because we tried on Chinatown Project which Karen Chin was. No, but it was a test. However, what happened for us when we tried to co-direct was like, I would be like, no, you decide if we're gonna shoot on that street, and then you'd be like, oh no, you could decide if you like that door. Like we would just kind of pass the buck back and forth to each other. So what we ended up was something that like neither one of us were like deciding. Remember, it was kind of, well, was that like coming from like your perspective of the story? It was at my, remember, it was such an awkward
who's on first? Yeah, you're both being deferential to the other person.
Yeah,
so,
it's much easier to like work for each other.
Yeah.
So she's doing something. How can I help? What can I do? You just offer stuff. In the same way with you know, with this film or anything that I've done, she'll read it and make suggestions, and you know, I want to hear what she says. Or when I'm on set, she's next to me. If I have a question about anything, I can always ask her. But I'm directing my films and she's directing her films. Right.
No, that makes total sense with the inevitable crunch of time and money. A little hierarchy is helpful.
Yes,
for sure. Because it's like, you know, if you're going to sink the boat, you want to, you know, take it yourself.
Someone's going to take
it. It's like the other person can grab the life jacket. You know?
Yeah, life jacket.
Just like get the water right into that wall. Yeah.
And so where are you both residing now? Since you've traveled, I mean, I've heard about, you know, you already lived in Japan and Iceland and got married in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which I heard about. Do you have, not during the pandemic, of course, but do you have some, you know, itches to go elsewhere and live elsewhere? Or are you pretty settled now?
We live in Los Angeles now, mainly because we have children, and you know, we really like the school district here, and her sister's here. You know, so we'll probably be here until they graduate, and then
high school.
Yeah. And then we've always talked about retiring in Iceland, because we lived there for 3 years, and we have a lot of friends there. Like you see them in the movie, and it's a really wonderful environment. And so, but we might go there sooner. Have a place that would be a sort of, I think that's the only place in our mind that we both agree on, right
now. Yeah I think for us it's like the most creative way to live for us or something right now, but our daughters think that's crazy idea, so I don't know. It's negotiable.
How old are your daughters?
They'll be 11 and 15 next week. They both have birthdays next week.
So they definitely have strong opinions. I think we talked a little bit about Iceland. I'm also fascinated by this, you know, I had hosted a world-class pianist, Vikingur Olafsson, but it was, there's, and my experience in Scandinavian countries in general is that they have incredible curiosity about the rest of the world because they're very clear they're not at the center of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
They want to go out and learn. And he said things like, we would never pass a body lying on the street. Like that just would never happen in Iceland. And I was like, and he said they have many different parties, but their most right-wing party is very left of our left.
Oh, for sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, they're like,
yeah,
it's a very socialist, society. All the Nordic countries are, and they're just everybody's written a book in Iceland. At Christmas time, it's like it's a thing that people give away books, and so it's like if you're buying groceries at the grocery store, the person stocking the shelves has probably written a book, and they're very creative and they're very well read, and like you said, they don't view themselves as the center of the world, but they feel it's responsible to know everything else they can about any culture. So if there's if there was an event in Iceland from another country, it would be just really well attended. People would they're just very intelligent, more than your general sort of like maybe some of the other places we've been to, and curious, so.
Yeah.
But somehow I find that it's just a really interesting contrast. On the one hand, Japanese society, getting back to your film, is also very specific, fascinating, very rich. People seem very thoughtful, but different, more, a little bit more isolated, perhaps. I mean, there's a lot of really deep-seated tradition, and there's so many generalizations that can be made that may sound inauthentic. But I love the contrast of thinking about these two countries, and you're having hop back and forth between the two to make this really lovely, intimate movie. And I guess my final question is, I know that you said just yesterday that one of your main influences is Ho Xiaoxian, the Taiwanese filmmaker. Are there others that you might cite?
Oh, I could just talk about Ho Xiaoxian forever. He's like, he's like 90% of the influence on this movie. I mean, the movie that he made that was such a big influence on me is Café Lumière, which is his homage to Ozu. So Ozu's somebody that I just feel is beyond our reach, but we try to go somewhere in that direction, but wouldn't say that we're quite there yet in terms of grasping his way of talking about humanity. But Wong Kar-wai has always been a really, really big influence on both of us. It's almost like more at the beginning of our films were super Wong Kar-wai influenced, and then now for me it's like, oh, let me try see what Ho Xiaoxian is doing and trying to learn from that. Tsai Ming-liang is a really big influence. Edward Yang, the actor Issei Ogata, who's in my film, the character, I mean, I wanted him, but the character that I was most influenced by was his character in Yi Yi. He was the Japanese businessman in that film, and he's just warm. It's just like what's your character. I was like, your character is like a sweater. It's like something you put on when you're like you need that comfort, And so Edward, there's so many Asian films that I think are big influences for us, but a lot of Taiwanese filmmakers, and we like Wong Kar-wai a lot. Now I'm going to leave some. Oh, Imamura is probably one of my favorite Japanese filmmakers, but his style is not necessarily the style of this particular movie, because I think Imamura said he makes films about the lower half of human society and the lower half of the human body. So it's like, but it's like such an inspiration because he's such a creative filmmaker and so prolific.
I think one of the things that many of us are relishing is how international films are getting seen more than ever. The streamers do create the opportunities that didn't used to exist as much. I used to go to the film forum all the time when I was living in New York, and that's where I got educated. But more and more these art houses, and especially now, they're really imperiled. But it's wonderful to see films shot in many different locations in many different languages, and nobody seems to give a damn anymore. That you have to read subtitles, and that just happened seemingly overnight. So, and your film hopefully will be a beneficiary of that obstacle having been removed after Bong Joon-ho made that famous comment, about the ancient captions. So it again, thank you so much. It feels like also very warm, inviting, emotional, but not overly so, just really, just a beautiful journey through Japan through the eyes of someone who is trying to heal. And I hope everyone sees it. And do you have plans for distribution? Do you want to talk about that at all?
Oh, we'll find out today. I mean, we'll find out this week. You know, it premieres today, so it's the first.
Oh, it premieres today. Okay, so yes, beautiful.
So
well, tomorrow is when
tomorrow will be today. Yes,
will air. So by then,
by the time you see this, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, obviously, it's a film that you want as many people to see as possible. You know, with every film, but you also want it to feel like really personal for somebody too.
Yeah.
More of like a,
well, in the absence of being able to travel as much as we like to, go see Blood, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. It's been really fun chatting with you.
Yeah, it's good to see you again.